Welcome back to Historical American Girl Read-Alouds. In this episode, I'm going to read the first chapter of Meet Samantha. This story takes place in 1904. Samantha Parkington, here she is, lived during the Victorian period. If you saw my other video about my first dollhouse, you'll know that this dollhouse I purchased used already painted for a modern day doll, and I'm slowly starting to turn it into a Victorian house. I'd like the whole thing to show what a Victorian home would have looked like in Samantha's time. So far I've gotten a lot done on the parlor, that's this area down here, the fireplace and the couches and the wallpaper, and I'll tell you a little bit more about all of that at the end of the video. The upper levels still have kind of bright colors that wouldn't have been during the Victorian period, but the parlor's starting to look about right. The Victorian period was in the early 1900s, and there was a lot of changes in the early 1900s. Some of them really great inventions and exciting changes, and some of them not so great, as Samantha will encounter in her stories. Chapter 1, Jessie. Samantha! The voice broke through the summer afternoon like a crack. The leaves of the quiet old oak tree suddenly rustled and dropped a squirming bundle of arms and legs. Samantha Parkington tumbled out of the tree. "Samantha, you're really dumb," the voice continued. It was coming from a hole in the hedge that separated Samantha's house from Eddie Ryland's. "You're so dumb you don't even know how to climb a tree." Samantha glanced at her scraped and bleeding knee and looked pained. Not because of the knee, but because the voice was at it again. She glared at its owner with a look that could have frozen water in July. "Go away, Eddie." But Eddie's round, sticky face didn't go away. "You're so dumb, you probably think 3 times 4 is 12, he said. "Eddie," Samantha looked disgusted, 3 times 4 is 12. "Well, anyway, you're so dumb." That was enough for Samantha. "Eddie," she said, "if you don't get out of here right now, I will take your entire beetle collection from behind the shed, and I'll put it in the offering plate at church on Sunday." She paused to be sure he was listening. "And I'll tell your mother you did it." Eddie's eyes grew wide. He pulled his mouth into a frog face and left to find a safer hiding place for his beetle collection. Samantha examined her knee. The bleeding had stopped, but her stocking was badly torn. She could picture how Grand Mary would look when she saw it. Grand Mary's eyes had a soft, warm light when they looked at Samantha, but her face could be very stern when she talked about growing up. "Discipline," Grand Mary always said, "is what turns girls into ladies." Samantha tugged at the hole in her stocking, but she couldn't hide it. The taffeta bow that had held her dark brown hair drooped over her forehead. Yes, this was a job for Jessie. Samantha hurried up the walk and climbed the porch steps 2 at a time. At the front door, she slowed down. If there was any noise at the front door, Elsa might come. Elsa was the new maid. She was always grumpy, and Samantha didn't want to listen to a lecture now. Luckily, the door was quiet. No one saw Samantha run all the way to the 3rd floor. There, at the end of the hall, was the sewing room, and in the corner sat Jessie. Yards and yards of soft pink material tumbled around her, and the sewing machine clicked quietly as her feet pressed the treadle back and forth. She hummed to its rhythm as her fine brown hands guided the cloth past the flashing needle. Jessie made clothes for the household. She was working on a new dress for Grandmary, but she stopped as Samantha came through the door. "Oh, Miss Samantha, just look at you," Jessie said. As she stood and turned, Jessie's large floating apron swirled over the baskets of thread and laces that rested on the floor. "What have you been up to?" "No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Here you are, 9 years old, almost a lady, and still getting into mischief like a ragamuffin. What will your Grandmary say?" Samantha folded her hands and looked at the floor until Jessie was quiet. The mild scolding was a small price to pay for the help she knew Jessie would give her. Already, Jessie had brushed the grass and dust from her hair. Now she checked Samantha's dress for tears and stains. She spotted the torn stockings. "Take off those shoes and stockings right now. Does your knee hurt?" asked Jessie. "No, Jessie, it's all right. I'd just rather not have to explain it to Grandmary," said Samantha. Jessie smiled and reached for her sewing basket. Samantha found a small clean rag and wet it with the water pitcher. She sponged her injured knee while Jessie sat down to repair the damaged stocking. As Samantha looked around the room, she noticed a piece of jelly biscuit on the floor. She must have dropped it the day before. 3 ants had found it. She was about to tell Jessie when she noticed 2 more ants on their way. It would be fun to see how many would come. Samantha sighed loudly. "It must be awfully boring to be grown up," she said. Jessie laughed softly. "Well, that depends. It depends a lot on the person. Now you, Miss Samantha, I don't think you'll have to be worried about being bored even when you're grown up." There were 7 ants on the jelly biscuit now. "I'll bet Cornelia isn't bored," said Samantha. Jessie laughed again. "Oh, no, I don't imagine Miss Cornelia is very often bored," she said. Cornelia was a friend of Samantha's favorite uncle. She was pretty and dark-haired, and she laughed easily. Anyone could see that she liked Uncle Guard a lot. But Samantha didn't think Cornelia was right for Uncle Guard. She thought someone like Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter, would be better. Alice Roosevelt did the most exciting things, and the newspapers were always talking about her. Alice Roosevelt was Teddy Roosevelt's daughter. And I have some pictures of Alice Roosevelt. Her mother died a few days after she was born, and she grew up to be a very wild and rambunctious child. She was always doing things to get into trouble at the White House, and her father said one time that he could either be President of the United States or Alice's father, but he could not be both at the same time because she was so much trouble. But she was also a very beautiful lady, and when she was young, she kind of did some things that were daring and not ladylike, which is why Samantha liked her. So Samantha thinks that Cornelia is not good enough for her uncle, but the President of the United States' daughter would be. She must like her uncle a lot. "Is Uncle Guard going to marry Cornelia?" asked Samantha. "That's none of our business," Jessie said firmly, "and children should not ask such questions." Samantha grumbled softly. "Oh, a minute ago I was almost a lady, now I'm a child again." 12 ants were on the biscuit, and 3 more were on the way. "Uncle Guard is a spy, you know," Samantha said. "Miss Samantha!" Jessie's head shot up in surprise. "Where do you get such foolish ideas?" "Well, he should be a spy," Samantha went on. He's so handsome and brave. Everyone would just fall in love with him. He could get their secrets, and they'd be so in love with him, they wouldn't even care. I think you'd better keep such ideas to yourself, Jessie said as she looked closely at the hole she was mending. You've made quite enough trouble for one day. There were 19 ants on the jelly biscuit. Jessie, did you know my mother and father? Samantha asked. Jessie spoke gently. You know I didn't, child. That accident in the boat happened when you were just 5. You know I didn't come to work for your grandmother till you were 7. Samantha had known that. Asking had really been wishing. She touched the locket pinned to her dress. Inside the small gold heart was a picture of her mother and father. She would have loved to hear Jessie talk about them. When Jessie told stories, she made everything sound like magic. Jessie would have made Samantha's parents seem like a prince and princess. Tell me about New Orleans, Jessie, please. Jessie picked up a piece of silk for the sleeve of Grandmary's new dress. Her musical voice began to tell about a place where flowers bloomed in winter, a place where there were huge white mansions and balconies made of iron that looked like lace. She told about spicy shrimp and about music and dancing in the streets. And the best part was everything Jessie said was true. She didn't have to make up stories about faraway places. Her husband, Lincoln, was a porter on the train that ran to New Orleans. Lincoln brought home wonderful tales of the places he'd seen and the people he'd met. And he never forgot Samantha. She had a scrapbook almost full of colorful postcards that he sent her from all of his trips. Sometimes he brought her pralines from New Orleans, brown sugary candy crowded with sweet pecans. Jessie and Lincoln made Samantha's world wide and wonderful. An hour passed easily with Jessie's soft voice carrying Samantha to dreamlike places. And that's the end of chapter 1. New Orleans is a very interesting place, and there are some American Girl dolls that are from New Orleans. And I don't have either one of them yet. Their names are Marie, Grace, and Cecile, but I hope to have them someday. But as you heard in the story, Samantha's parents have passed away, and so she's being raised by her grandmother, who she calls Grand Mary. And you can tell that her grandmother is very formal. The Victorian times were very formal time periods. In the story, she got a hole in her stocking. And at that time, girls wore stockings, which were like really tall socks that sometimes were held up with bows or ribbons and things. At this time, elastic was becoming more available, and so sometimes they did have elastic in the top of their stockings, and sometimes they had to tie them up. The Samantha doll originally had black stockings, but my Samantha doll is quite old and has been played with quite a bit, so her stockings are lost, as well as the bow that kind of matches her dress. I have a picture of what stockings would have looked like too. These are some stockings here that are being sold, 3 pairs for $1. And here's some women showing their stockings. This time period would have been probably 20 years or so after 1904, probably in the 1920s, because women wouldn't have worn such short skirts or shown their stockings during Samantha's day. But they did here. But her parlor here is made up of mostly non-American Girl items. American Girl did not make any furniture for a parlor, but some other companies did. So this couch here and this couch here show you the really pretty fabrics that they had in the Victorian period. Everything was decorated like layer upon layer of gold and lace and decorations, and a really ornate time period. I don't have anything hung up on my walls yet, but I will at some point have some pictures and mirrors and things that are really ornate to give you more of a feel of the time period. The couch that Samantha's sitting on here, this is called a fainting couch. And the reason why it's called a fainting couch is because women at this time period wore really tight things called corsets around their waist to make their waist look really small. And they were so tight that they limited the air that a girl could get or a lady could get. And sometimes it made her lightheaded and faint. So that's why they had a fainting couch at that time. Thank goodness we don't have to wear corsets anymore. The one thing I do have in this room that was from American Girl from the time period is this phonograph. This was how they played music in Victorian times. And the American Girl phonograph does play records, which are in this little book here. In this little book, there's little sleeves that have 3 records on them, in them. And the records play songs from the time. So this first record plays the Maple Leaf Rag, which the song The Entertainer was from this time period, which has really been really popular over the ages. So you might have heard The Entertainer before, but this song was from the same kind of time period. The little needle on this part of the phonograph would run along the record, and that's what would make the sound come out of the little horn here that would project it. The other records that come with Samantha's phonograph, actually it's Rebecca's phonograph, but it's from the same kind of time period, is Your Grand Old Flag, which is a song you may have even heard today, and Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which I'm sure you've heard. That's a popular one today. So that's the end of the first chapter. Tune in next time to see what happens about the hole in Samantha's stocking and her pesky neighbor Eddie and the biscuit with all the ants in the sewing room. See you then.